Hi, everyone. Welcome to the People's Forum. We are a space for political education, culture work, and also honored to be part of the Shut It Down for Palestine Coalition, where for over the past 54 weeks, we've held weekly volunteer meetings that have brought in hundreds of people across New York City and New Jersey who are ready to organize their neighborhoods and bring in their communities in the struggle to join the struggle for Palestinian liberation and the anti-imperialist struggle. So we're very honored to have you all here today, especially for this awesome book. Yeah, give it up, give it up. Don't be shy, don't be shy. For this awesome book, Born Jewish in Nazi Europe, My Journey to Becoming Anti-Zionist. And I got the honor to actually skim through it a little bit, and it really, I think the word journey is actually really accurate because it follows, it's very personally follows, you know, you're making sense of these experiences from childhood, from Belgium to Mozambique to New York City, and ultimately undergoing profound political transformation and coming out on the other side, you know, strengthened, dedicated to struggle for anti-imperialism and in service of liberation. So we're very honored to have you here, Dr. Suzanne Ross, and it's going to be a beautiful conversation, which I'm sure we are all very excited, right? Awesome. All right, and with that, I'll pass it over to you, and yeah. This on?
Okay, so Saidi, thank you very, very much. And thank you to the People's Forum for this wonderful opportunity to have this event here. People's Forum does such great work, and we are so proud to be here tonight with them. And talk of Palestine, the People's Forum has become like the home of Palestine in New York City. There's so many events and so much about Palestine. I mean, just look at the things that are around on the walls and so on and so on. So, I just want to start by thanking the many people who made this possible. Even though it's a very small book in size, it took an enormous amount of work and lots of complex thinking on my part and a lot of people who helped on it. So, but, you know, it's exciting to be here and a happy occasion, but I just want to start to, you know, to have us grounded correctly, properly on what do we all say? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea,
Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea,
Palestine will be free.
Okay, now we know why we're here. I don't have to say much else. So first I want to thank the people who played such a major role in my being able to write what was very difficult for me to write. So number one, my daughter, Clara Ross Beagle, who's sitting right here. Everybody know her? Raise your hand so they know who you are. My granddaughter, where's Isabel Ross Rivera, right there. A lot of you may remember her as this little thing who used to be at rallies, always speaking at rallies. She still is able to speak, but she's not going to speak tonight, right? Okay. And also, somebody that most of you don't know, Bronx, where's Bronx? Ross Shabazz. There he is in the back with his friend.
Oh, you gotta stand up, we can't see him.
Why don't you stand up so people can really see you? Could you stand up, Bronx? Thank you.
Hey, Bronx.
And his friend Brandon.
Hey, Brandon.
And Bronx's career as a political activist is going to start when I come in January. I've been invited to speak at his class. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm supposed to speak on activism and how I became an activist. So I'm looking forward to that. And Bronx will be hosting me at that event. The people who without whom this never could have happened, this book, are really Leland Schoenstein and Gary Wilson, who are sitting right there. Would you both raise your hands? So other than writing the book, they did absolutely everything. Number one, motivate me to write it. and say, look, we need a book like that. We need that experience that you have. You really need to write it. Say, no, we don't need a book. I don't really have, it's going to be too small. I don't have enough. They just went on. They never gave up on insisting that I speak. And they also did all the work for producing it, all the work. I did none of it. And they were phenomenal. And I am so grateful. And the thing about them both, for those of you who don't know them, are they're true communists. And I use that with great carefully. They're true communists. They did everything, never asking for anything, never taking any credit, just incredible in their morality, that revolutionary morality. I really want to make sure that everybody here hears that, because we don't always get that in the movement and anywhere else. So thank you very much again in front of everybody, and like that. And the next person is Bill Dores, who's sitting right here. And I like to talk about the fact that he was a junior high school dropout. But that's me. I just think that's so important because he turned out to be so smart. He's unbelievable in what he knows. He really is unbelievable. How many people who know him know that about him? So people know. I mean, and I think it's a reminder, though most of us know it, that we don't learn most of what we learn in schools, and that he learned it through life. He has spent over 50 years in the Palestine Solidarity Movement. And he has traveled to so many countries. You didn't even tell me the names of the countries, which I asked for. But I want people to know that he's learned so much from his direct experience in the Middle East. Was arrested in, let me see where I wrote down some notes about you. I don't know what I did with it. Here it is. So Bill, right now he's on the executive committee in PAL-Awda, which is a New York and New Jersey solidarity group. But he has a long history. Before that, as I said, he worked in the November 29th Coalition for Palestine, which many of you who are old enough might remember. That was a big, big part of the early part of the solidarity movement for Palestine in the 80s. And then he was arrested in Palestine in 1988 during the first Intifada. And he was, he helped organize the 2009 Viva Palestina USA medical aid convoy. Oh, hola. Welcome, Immortal Technique. So while I welcome Immortal Technique, let me also welcome our beloved Pam Africa. I'll say more about her in a minute. So that's Bill Dores' long history. And he's obviously taught himself a lot and learned a lot in the movement and from activism and so on. So I just want to say that about him. And before we actually introduce some of the speakers, somebody who's not speaking, but I want to introduce, is somebody I helped in his effort when he interviewed Mumia about the LGBTQ issues. I don't know how many of you heard it on WBAI or read the archives. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work, and about changing consciousness, like I did about Zionism. It has some similarities in terms of the changes Mumia went through on this issue. And so Bob, raise your hand, please, so people can see who you are. If you want information on how to get this document and how to find out about it, let me tell you, it's really worth it. It's really worth it. It's a major issue in our times, and Mumia has spoken out. So that's Bob Lederer there. And and Mama Pam Africa. Oh, I'm sorry.
This can beat Mama Pam.
So, yeah, I don't want to beat her up. So she's obviously, for many of you who've been out in the movement for all these decades now, Pam has been the founder and leader of International Concern Family and Friends. I call her our general. For years, I've been saying she's our general, and I'm talking about military, and our spiritual leader. So she's our general in the streets. For anybody who's ever been in the streets with her, you know, I'll just tell quickly this one story where we're in Philadelphia, and there are thousands of us, and some of the enemy people are up on top of a building, and they're throwing things down at us. And so we wait, you know, anyway, she starts yelling up to them in the way nobody else can, and says to the cops, she says to the cops, if you don't bring them down and stop them from doing this, we're going right up there. Do you know that in 2 seconds flat, it stopped, in 2 seconds flat. And Pam is really known, I think internationally is not an exaggeration, for her for the courage she shows in the street. Somebody was saying, one of our people the other day at a rally in Philadelphia was saying, she's 5 foot tall. And I speak for somebody who's also 5 foot tall. She's 5 foot tall and gets up there and scares the cops. I've been in situations with her which were unbelievable. I remember, you probably don't remember this, we were getting on an elevator once in Philadelphia, and the door opens up and it's full of cops. So we get on, and the guy says something about, I don't know, we end up saying, they end up saying, you know, we're not so bad, right? We could have fucked you up if we had gone up, if we, you know, just locked this elevator and made sure you wouldn't get off. And she looks at them and she says, and we would have fucked you up.
Elevator opening and throwing bodies out there.
So, and the other side of Pam is her love for the people. Anybody who's been an activist in the movement knows the love that she shows all the time and that she really feels. And in contrast to what she shows the cops, we see her showing the love for the people all the time. So that's Pam. I'm going to introduce everyone. I won't introduce them separately then. And finally, we have somebody that most of you never heard of, Immortal Technique. And who's an internationally loved hip hop artist. And I say that without exaggeration. He's an internationally loved hip hop artist, longtime Mumia supporter, donates food and other supplies in Harlem for free, of course. And on another note, just as a personal note, and a lot of people, you know, we just know that this is an important part of our solidarity and the kind of movement we build. So our family had a major crisis a few years ago, a very dangerous situation for us. And who was the first to step up, literally the first, and call, what can I do to help? Tech, Immortal Technique.
All right.
So we love all of you. We love all of you, and I'm so thrilled to be here with you and to hear what everybody has to say. And I'm going to start. And people tell me I have the longest to speak and that it's my birthday party. So I will talk about. So first of all, just so people have the facts, I was not born to a Zionist family. I was born in Antwerp, Belgium in 1937. And my family was a fairly traditional, middle class, working class, really working class, religious family. And I never heard anything about Zionism until we got to Palestine before the war. From 1944 to 1945, I lived on a kibbutz. This is after a long journey escaping the Nazis. So when we came to Palestine, I didn't hear my parents all excited about getting to Palestine, the Holy Land. I never heard the phrase Holy Land. And the minute we got a chance, we left. A year later, we left. My parents were not Zionists. This is 1945, the end of World War II, and we were not Zionists. Nobody talked about Zionism. And when we left what was then not yet Israel, because this is 1945, before the State of Israel was created, nobody cried about leaving the Holy Land. We cried about leaving relatives, but nobody didn't seem like a big deal, you know? So it was not, there was a Zionist movement by that time, but it was relatively small, and my parents weren't part of it. We had one aunt who had been a Zionist. There were some people who were Zionists. Herzl, the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, had talked about Zionism in the late 1800s. And then the Balfour Declaration, the famous legitimization, besides God, of course, who's legitimatized Israel for Jews, but aside from God, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which was done in the name of the colonial power of that region. Great Britain was the colonial power of Palestine at that time. And Balfour declared that Palestine would be set aside for Jews. And at that time, I always keep this little statistic near my computer so I don't ever forget it. At that time in 1917, when this was bequeathed to Jews, 2.5 of the people in Palestine, 2.5% of the people in Palestine were Jews. Everybody hear that? 2.5% of the people in Palestine were Jews, and they were being given the land to be theirs. One of the interesting things that actually Bill turned me on to was it's the first appendix in Richard Becker's book on Palestine. And this appendix is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. I sat there feeling like I was reading the Pentagon Papers, which some of you are old enough to remember what it was like to discover the actual conversations of the people who were running the empire and running the war in Vietnam. So this appendix, which I strongly recommend, is a dialogue between many of the Zionist leaders before the State of Israel was created. And it was them talking to the colonialists, to the British, different big shots, and maybe some Americans at that time too, US people. And the dialogue is absolutely incredible. It goes on and on with the Zionists speaking to the colonialists saying, look, we can help you in the Middle East. We can help you control the Middle East. You need some educated, civilized people to do this. And I'm not changing the words. You need them. You need us to help maintain the kind of colonial presence that you would have in the region. And nobody else can do it. It has to be white people. I don't know if they use the word white people or it can't be dark people. And it is a collaboration between the Zionists and the colonialists planning this takeover, what became the settler colonial project of Israel. So this is not something that developed, it didn't show up completely right away, and people didn't know all about this, but this is what happened. Just as what we read in the Pentagons is what happened during the war in Vietnam. That was the kind of talk they were having. How are we going to how are we going to fool the anti-war movement, et cetera, et cetera. So I found that one of the most interesting pieces I've read in this period. And the phrase they used that Israel, this Jewish state, could become a jumping point for colonial domination of the Middle East. Okay? So this wasn't something that was just done to the Jewish Zionists. This was something that was worked on together. It was a collaboration. And the state of Israel we see today is definitely a collaboration. Oh, thank you, Imam. The Imam Al-Amin is here with us. Thank you. Thank you, Raja Khan. He always comes. They always travel with the Imam and with Mumia. Mumia will be up in a minute, right? Oh, he is. I didn't see him up. Okay. So we have our close friends with us. So during all this time, in the meantime, during the Nazi rise to power, the Holocaust swept up millions of Jews into the Nazi death machine, leaving European Jews massacred and traumatized by this anti-Semitic genocide with 6 million Jews killed. So this happened. Once this happened, obviously, Jewish people became much more open and thinking more, we got to get hell out of Europe. We got to get out of here. We just do need a state. And as the Zionists were presenting their strategy, more and more people were open to it. And like my family. So people who had not been Zionists before, who were not thinking of a Jewish homeland, after the Holocaust, thought twice and say, hey, that might be the only thing that could help us. So at this time, the Zionists were gathering in Europe and so on, and Ben-Gurion had been in Poland before and was already giving signs of being willing, if necessary, to ethnically cleanse Palestine, to make Palestine a Jewish state, and that it would take time and maybe, exactly, but, if the Palestinians didn't leave willingly, the indigenous people of Palestine didn't leave, we might have to force them out. And this is all there, it's not, this was secret to most of us for many, many years, but it's available, really available now. So the Zionists took advantage of that moment in history and pushed harder and harder for a Jewish state. And the partition plan of 1947 was devised by Zionists in the United Nations with Great Britain and the United States. And the partition plan passed. But guess what? Jews were ecstatic. My father was crying. He had never been a Zionist, and he never talked about the fact that we had left Israel, the predecessor of Israel, just a few months earlier, and you would have thought he had been a Zionist all his life. All of a sudden, the Zionist spirit grabbed people. So, but who of course was never consulted about the partition plan? Palestinians were never consulted, and none of the Arab nations were consulted. This was a plan that was popular with the Zionists, with Jewish people who were now suffering from this great trauma. And that's what was really happening at that time. And the State of Israel was created a year later in 1948. There was a huge escalation of Zionism in the whole world, really, but mostly in Israel and the United States. And the State of Israel was created in 1948. The Nakba, the disaster, which is what the Palestinians called it, because what was happening around that time was things that we didn't hear about. I know I didn't. I was young, but I still never heard about it. And I was in a very rooted in a Jewish community, and we never heard about Deir Yassin. We never heard about Deir Yassin, the massacres, and the attempt to appropriate more and more land. And remember, this map of where we are today and where Palestine was way back then, tells us the real story. I say that if you only look at that map in the book that I put out and Malcolm's introductory statement, you know what you need to know. That's enough. That's really the heart of what I'm trying to get across. The message of Malcolm, identifying for people that what Israel was an outpost of imperialism, that it was created to divide the people of Africa from the people of the Middle East, that it was that the bullshit that was put out about Israel caring about Africa, because Israel was making all kinds of deals with African nations, and that whole story wasn't really the story. And that when I read Malcolm's thing, I thought, wow, why doesn't everybody read this? And he wrote it in 1964, if you look at the book. And in 1964, Malcolm was putting it out. And very soon after, by 1967, SNCC, the Southern, what's it stand for again? Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I told you he knows everything. And SNCC and the Black movement to this day, the Black nationalists, the more militant sectors of the Black movement, have really played a leading role consistently. And, the United States has tried to do everything possible to buy off sectors of the Black movement to sell out. So, for example, the Congressional Black Caucus was a very, very strong place of opposition to the state of Israel. It no longer is. Within the last few years, the Congressional Black Caucus has sold out so much on things like that. So there's been a real weakening of that support in terms of the divisive role that the empire always plays in dividing the progressive, weakening the progressive movement. One of the things that, and I'll finish soon after that, is you all, many of you at least, know the phrase hasbara. Hasbara means, in Hebrew, technically, literally, means explanation. But what hasbara is used in Israel is to talk about to create the narrative, the false narrative that has been created around what Israel is. And here are some of them that's regularly been transmitted to generations of people. So one of them was, of course, the ethnic cleansing, which has been denied, so that's been denied completely. Two was the constant focus on the Israelis being the victim. I remember when I was on the kibbutz, one of the songs that we sang all the time was Artenu Haktantonet. Yeah, there are plenty of seats here. Please come and get a seat. Hi, everybody. So, Artenu Haktantonet means this tiny, tiny country. Israel was always portrayed as tiny and helpless, and in the face of all these Arab nations surrounding it, and so on. So that, and Israelis and Jews in general took on, after a while, this identity of being just victims, and victims of horrible things that have happened. And ultimately, the irrationality of this, if you think about it, so we were victims of the Nazis and the Nazi Holocaust, and then you turn around and you make the Palestinians responsible for that? Palestinians are miles and miles away, had nothing to do with the Nazi Holocaust. Nothing to do with it. How did the Israelis and the Zionists, how could they able to convince millions of people that the enemy were these so-called Arabs, the darkest skinned people of the Middle East, that these were the people who were responsible for what had happened during World War II in Europe. It's completely insane, which much of the story around Zionism and Judaism is insane, really insane. The story makes no sense. I tell a story where a cousin of mine who had become very wealthy in Canada once explained to me why he supports Israel. And what he said was that he had lived as a child in Montreal, and that there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and some of the kids had beaten them up often in the neighborhood. And he looked at me as though I should therefore understand that he would be against Palestinians. And this is not uncommon. If you talk to people who are Zionists, they say the most irrational things to justify their destruction of Palestine and to justify the genocide that they've created. And if you look at the story, it all was predictable. If enough of us had seen it, if enough of us had understood that this was happening, it was the story, the narrative, the way it started and ended. Once it started a certain way, it was totally predictable. And what developed among Jews and Zionists, I think, was a spirit of revenge that was unbelievable. A vicious spirit of revenge. And what do you do when you're revengeful like that? It kills your soul. You stop being a human. I mean, what level of revenge do you have for what people experience as an injustice? And that level of revenge is something that was very, very much characterized in the Zionist movement as at home and in Israel. So I spent 1 year in a kibbutz, and the kibbutz had already abandoned a lot of the Jewish culture, the positive Jewish culture, the culture that I loved about Judaism. And a lot of people are shaking their heads. People know this. Shalom Aleichem, the great writer who loved humanity. The wonderful comic characters of Judaism, which my family has always been raised on. They all know, they've known for years. The wise men of Chelm, and there's a little graphic of the wise men of Chelm in my book, and it's the story of the wise men of Chelm. It's very charming, really, the stories. And all of that was negated once the Zionists took over, and once they took over Israel, and once the Israeli state was developed. There was huge hostility to religion, number one. They only began playing up to religion once they needed more Jews to immigrate to balance the population of Palestinians. So then they began talking about religion. Suddenly the president started wearing yarmulkes. None of the early presidents of Israel ever was shown in public with a yarmulke. You know, they were anti-religious. They were secular, and not only secular, but anti-religious. And when I tell the story in the book, when I was a kid on this left kibbutz, Beit Alpha, the contempt for religious Jews, there were grandparents who had come from Europe. They were the settlers, and then they were the next generation, but they were older generation who had left in a rush from Europe to survive, were on the kibbutzim. And there was a special house for them. And the kids in my class chased them. When they saw the older people, they would chase them and make fun of them. And that was the attitude on the kibbutz. No respect for elders. I remember I was young, very young, but I hadn't been raised that way by my parents at all. And I was appalled when I saw that. And the kibbutz culture was very much like that. I tell a story in the book about a cousin of mine who hid the fact that he was born in Europe until he was on his deathbed, literally. When he was 88, he told the story at a Shoah event and cried. But he had lived on that kibbutz since he was, I think, 7 or something like that, all his life. And people didn't know that he had been born in Europe because there was such a lack of respect. The kibbutzim was the people who were born, the Sabras, the people who were born in the kibbutzim, the people who were born in Israel. So the level, internal racism, internal prejudice was incredible. So the two work together. So the Zionist plan with that hatred for what Europe stood for and contempt worked together to develop the culture that existed. So, whoops. The other thing, okay. So the big turning point for me, and I talk about it because it was so important for me, was the resolution in the United Nations in 1975 that Zionism is racism. How many of you remember that? If you're old enough, it's an age issue. You really had to have lived through it, but it was major, major point. And it freaked me out at the time, silently. I didn't talk to anybody about it. It was overturned ultimately in 1991. It was overturned in the United Nations. But it was a very, very important challenge to those of us who still could not believe that Israel would be seen as racist. So let me talk for a minute about what I think the future brings, and if I can find it. Where is the other copy? Do you have it, Claire? No? Okay. So I'll just talk from the top of my head. And of course, this is all new to me. So I think I'll remember. So a big part now, first of all, obviously, we have to work very hard to support whatever the agenda is of the Palestinian movement. Self-determination for the Palestinian people. It is not the solidarity movement's job to define whether it's going to be secular or religious or this or that. It's really a bottom line principle. If we don't stand for that, we're not for solidarity. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have to be internationalists. And we can't just look at one spot in the world. And Palestine is obviously very, very important in what we see happening here. But out of context, nothing makes sense. So the context has to be international. And the context has to be that we look at settler colonialism, which is what Israel was, of course, a settler colony, that we have to look at that and see how that was developed and how we need to stop it. So, for example, understanding the international situation, understanding what happens along those terms is the ability to see how the empire works. So if there's a conflict in whatever part of Latin America, any other part of the world, we have to understand how that fits into the US plans and what the United States is doing, the empire, the role of the empire. And that is key to how we fight it. And whether it's in Venezuela, when they're talking about the lack of democracy in Venezuela, nonstop, and get programs like Democracy Now! Focusing on the elections and on the distortions, and is it true and is it not true? And that kind of focus without looking at what the United States role is in this and who's doing so much of the work behind the scenes, that we won't understand how to fight it if we don't understand that we have to be in solidarity with Venezuela. And we don't get bogged down in whether this one has this report on it, that, a lot of petty issues or issues that are not the main point. So understanding that is very, very important. And whether it's in, as it comes up all the time, and Palestine, of course, and Israel is in this period of time, we have to see how this plan was worked out. You know, the genocide didn't just happen, and it didn't just come out of nowhere. It came out of decades. And I was trying to give you some of the background that I've learned about the decades of work that was done to build up this kind of possibility, to build up a genocide, to build up the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the land. I mean, what could demonstrate this more? I need say nothing more. The maps speak for themselves. That is the ethnic cleansing that Ben-Gurion was already talking about back in the 30s, and other Zionists as well. So all of that was going on, and that's the complexity, is to understand all that and how that fit in with a kind of reactionary culture that existed in Israel during more and more. And to this day, when you see what's happening in Israel today, a lot of us who were brought up in Jewish culture and know some of the history or had any idealistic feelings about this, to see what Israel is doing today. Do you remember as kids hearing Jews could never do that? Mm-hmm. Jews could never do this. Well, lo and behold, Jews could do it. In fact, any people can do it. And with the right dynamics in the world and the right, I mean the wrong, I don't mean the right in the correct way, but all of that history and everything that was going on, it's possible. And what seemed absolutely impossible, that Jews would become like Nazis. And I repeat that Jews would become like Nazis. I mean, you know, I was not brought up, people are shaking their heads. All of us who went through some kind of love for Judaism years back are shocked to this day and have had to do somersaults to come to terms with this reality. So I think the direction for how to go in the future is clear, how we must offer solidarity and how to the Palestinian movement as it develops, as it will surely develop again. And we have to accept the fact that what we were raised to believe as children and what we grew up thinking, a lot of it was just not true. And it's been very painful for a lot of people. And I have to say, I've been telling people, I've been getting a lot of calls about this book and a lot of emails. And the most poignant ones in many ways have been from Jewish people crying and saying, when they read this, what I wrote, it reminds them so much of what they had to go through. And people say that this story, so we're here but there are wonderful things to celebrate. One is that the Jewish people in this country at least, and all over the world really, England, France, have been amazing in their switching sides, have been amazing in the response of the Jewish community. I mean, not only Jewish Voice, but the encampments, so much response. So many people had to change. A majority of young Jews no longer support Israel. No longer, and you know, these organizations that were very popular, like Hillel, they're abandoned, a lot of them, abandoned in this period. So that is a very, very, and all over the world, Israel has become, you know, what's the word? Israel has correctly earned the title of being a pariah in the whole world. Do I have agreement with that? A pariah. And that's what we're here to oppose. Everything about that Hasbara. Israel had the most amazing international propaganda machine. Amazing that it was able to reach so many people and influence them. It really was an incredible machine, propaganda machine. Hasbara was certainly not an explanation. And so we take great pride in that, all of us together having changed the tide and having changed the image of, do you remember the holy image that was portrayed of Jews and how wonderful, and the democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East and all this other bullshit, it's over. That's over. That's over. That's gone. So thank you very much. And Bill Dores will fill you in with everything else. Thank you, Bill.
I hope people don't mind if I sit. I'm recovering from a knee injury. As we speak, of course, the Holocaust in Gaza, in Palestine, in Syria, and Lebanon continues. Every day, the F-16s and F-35s and Apache helicopters, US-made with Zionist markings, take off to unload the most high-tech weapons of mass destruction on tents full of refugees, on homes and schools and hospitals. With drones, they target doctors and journalists and nurses, and with bombs and artillery, they murder thousands of people at random. Their snipers target children, as they always have done. I've seen that 30 years ago. We've heard in Haaretz, the now out of favor Israeli newspaper, carried a report, interview with soldiers, IDF soldiers, terrorists in Gaza, talking about the Netzarim line, the corpse line, where anybody who crosses that line gets shot. Doesn't matter how old they are, who they are, their gender. And then there's the slow weapon of mass starvation. We know the names of some of the martyred. Chef Mahmoud Ahmadoun, who refused to leave North Gaza because he wanted to stay and feed the people. So they targeted him for assassination with a quadricopter. We know the beautiful grandfather, Khalid Naban, who came to the world's attention because of his children, Tariq, 5-year-old Tariq, and 3-year-old Reem, who were murdered by the Israeli war machine last year. And he made these beautiful videos, and he devoted his life to helping people. So of course they killed him, they had to. It was artillery at that time. And every day, US C-5A Galaxy planes take off from US military bases, loaded with the most horrible weapons of mass destruction, 2,000-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs, white phosphorus, thermobaric bombs, weapons that turn bone and vaporize bodies. We don't even know what they are, but they're being tested on the children of Gaza. Whatever it was they dropped on Tartus in Syria a few days ago that registered 3.5 on the Richter scale. All these things are brought in daily from the United States or from US military bases to keep the Israeli war machine in action. Even the jet fuel that runs the US-made warplanes of the Israeli Air Force is shipped in from Texas, already refined by the Valero Corporation at US taxpayers' expense. If there's two things these 14 months of horror have made clear, one is that genocide is the life of the Zionist state, its reason for existence, its purpose of existence, its identity. They now seek to complete the Holocaust they began in 1947, the Nakba. Their goal, the goal of the Zionist rulers in Palestine, is the complete eradication of the Palestinian people, the final solution of what they consider the Palestinian problem. Because to them, the very existence of Palestinians represents a debt they owe, a claim on the land they stole, where they now build condos to sell to well-off Anglos. That's what they call settlers from the United States in Palestine, often for second homes. And that's why they target Gaza in particular, and in particular camps like Jabalia, which last year was the most densely populated place on earth, the heart of the resistance, and the camps on the West Bank like Jenin, because not only do they want that land, for condos and golf courses, but because in those camps, for Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, but because in those camps lived the families who were driven from their homes in 1948, but who never gave up, their right to return. Because to them, to the people of Jabalia, of Nusayrat, who are being bombed every day, Palestine is their home, their land, to their soil for centuries, for millennium. To the Zionist state, it's real estate, property to be sold to colonizers from the West. But even if not a single Palestinian remained, the Zionists would not stop, because colonizers colonize. And they don't just want all of Gaza and the West Bank, they also want Lebanon and Syria and more. But the other thing that this has made clear, these months have made clear, is the absolute commitment of the US political, military, financial establishment, of the Pentagon and its political representatives in the White House and Congress, both Democrat and Republican, to the attempted genocide of the Palestinian people and the Zionist project of regional destruction. No political consideration, not even losing the White House, was allowed to interfere with the mission of keeping the genocide going. Proof: in 2022, the US gave Israel about $4 billion in direct military aid, as it has for decades. Since the latest war of attempted extermination began, the Biden regime has given at least $30 billion and pledged tens of billions more to the genocide state. All of this is completely illegal because these weapons are being used illegally. And in the spring, when Congress was deadlocked and the money was frozen, the Biden White House even went around Congress to fulfill its mission of keeping the genocide going. You know, they understood the assignment. And that doesn't even count the countless bombing raids the US itself has carried out, along with the Israeli Air Force, on Lebanon, on Syria, on Yemen, on Iran, to stop anyone from interfering with the genocide. The Zionist state knows well that when the blood flows, the money flows. The more they wage war, the more they get from the United States. That money never even leaves the United States, though. It goes straight into the coffers of Boeing and Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics and Raytheon and Valero and to Citibank to pay back the $2.5 billion they loaned Israel to buy F-35s, and thence to Wall Street, to BlackRock and Blackstone and State Street and Vanguard and the other conglomerates, financial conglomerates and shadow banks that control the economy of this country. You know, Trump has filled his cabinet with psychotic genocide advocates, guys like Pete Hegseth, the drunken would-be Knight Templar who rants about a new crusade. But is there any horrible weapon the Trump regime could give the Zionists that Biden has not already given them? Will they give hundreds of billions of dollars, more than over the tens of billions of dollars? Do they have that? There is a reason for that commitment. It is that the Zionist state, the Zionist entity in Palestine, is doing exactly what the US ruling class wants it to do: destroy. The state of Israel is their wrecking ball in the Middle East. There are those who say this is all because a Zionist lobby makes the US government act against the interests, US national interests. But there is no US national interest. There are only class interests. And what's in the interest of the working class, the oppressed nations of this country, the vast majority? Our interest is in healthcare and schools and housing and jobs for all, not in blowing up schools and hospitals and housing in other countries. Sorry. But for the US corporate ruling class, the 1%, they have an entirely different interest. They depend on endless war and destruction, not only for the immediate profits of war, but to maintain the obsolescent position of Wall Street and the US dollar at the center of the world economy. They need to break up and destroy any avenues of economic life on this planet that don't lead to Wall Street. And they need to keep Arabian petrodollars flowing into US banks, into US corporations. Now, our meeting today began the subject with World War II. which many people think of as the good war because the United States was led by FDR and was allied with the Soviet Union and freedom fighters from Philippines to France against a truly monstrous enemy. But for the corporate ruling class of this country, many of whom supported Hitler in the 30s, that war was the best thing that ever happened. Why? Because the global destruction cemented Wall Street's position at the center of the world economy. More than 50% of the world's industrial production in 1945 was in the United States. And it also, the big prize was the control of the US corporate ownership of the oil fields of the Arabian Peninsula, which gave the US control over the global energy market. It's not because the US needs oil, it's because it's to keep it's the wealth, the profits from oil to keep that flowing here. So what they've basically been running, it was 2 years later that Harry Truman basically created the state of Israel, ramming partition through the United Nations, when most of Africa and much of Asia and the Caribbean could not even vote. They were still colonized. They bribed so many countries who were dependent on the US at that time. They said, you vote, or you don't get a dime for us, or we retaliate against you. And what they created basically is a protection racket, where the goal, the profit, the revenue is the oil money, the oil revenues the U.S. corporations still get from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and so on, Qatar. And Israel plays the role of an enforcer. 10? Okay. But an enforcer needs a rep. It depends on fear. The U.S. did not let World War II end before they used the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to terrify the world. Israel is Washington's nuclear bomb in the Middle East, an instrument of destruction that shows the destructive power, the destructive force available to U.S. imperialism. And in 1973, when the cost of the Vietnam War forced Nixon to take the dollar off the gold standard, it was the control of Arabian oil and petrodollars that allowed them to do that. The fact that oil is denominated in dollars. And while the U.S. control, like in 1960, more than half of the overseas profits of U.S. corporations came from Arabian and Iranian oil. That's been eroded because there were revolutions. There were revolutions in Libya. There were revolutions in Iraq. There was revolutions in Egypt. There was a revolution in Iran. They invested so much in the Shah, but he was thrown out in 1979 by the people. See, all these countries have a problem to the U.S. They have people who have a conflict of interest because there's a conflict of interest between the interests of the U.S. ruling class and the needs of the people of the world to develop and economic independence. Only in Israel, they have a loyal army of settlers who believe they are beholden, to U.S. dollar, to U.S. imperialism, to U.S. imperial power, the U.S. empire. Machiavelli in The Prince said that the secret to power is you take somebody's house and you give it to somebody else. And that person will then be forever loyal to you. But there are two other things these months have made clear. One is that the Palestinian resistance will not be crushed. They've been trying for 77 years. But even today, in the ruins of Gaza, the Palestinian people, or Hamas, the Islamic resistance, all the resistance factions are still fighting. And in Lebanon, they wanted to destroy Syria. They still want to destroy Iran, because Iran, the crime of countries like Iran, Syria, Iraq before the U.S. invasion, Libya in Gaddafi's time, is the same as Venezuela, of many countries, of other countries they target around the world, even Russia, is that they do not pay tribute to the United States. Whatever we think of their governments, whatever could be said, they know they don't pay tribute in this protection racket, and therefore they have to be targeted. And that's a job that Israel shares with the U.S. military. Okay, the Palestinian people will not be crushed. What also is made clear is that the struggle in this country, the struggle against corporate power, the struggle for health care, for housing, for the things we need, is inseparable from the struggle against the U.S. war machine. They just passed an almost $900 billion military budget. I think it was yesterday or the day before. The billions, tens of billions they give to the Zionist state don't even come out of that. They come out of the State Department budget. So it's really over $1 trillion when you add all that in, the CIA, everything else. And Israel, the racist state in the Zionist state in the Levant, is a integral part of that war machine. It's an integral part of the looting of our communities to pay for endless war that Martin Luther King spoke about when he said that the bombs that fall in Vietnam also explode in communities here. That's just as much true today as it was then. And so our struggle is, the struggle of working class and oppressed people here is one with the struggle of the Palestinian people. And we need to stay in the streets. We need to be in the streets this Saturday, 2 o'clock in Times Square for the Christmas shoppers. And I want to just say a quick word about some of the work my organization, PAL-Awda, the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation, is doing. We have a campaign to hold corporations accountable. And a priority is Citibank, because Citibank is not only the biggest so-called foreign bank in Palestine, in occupied Palestine, it also loaned, because the Zionists spend the money the U.S. gives them faster than Congress can appropriate it, they loaned them $2.5 billion to buy F-35s that now the U.S. government is paying back. So, we want to also, Citibank, Chevron, which steals the gas from off the coast of occupied Palestine, Valero. These are much more important than Starbucks, McDonald's, small fry like that. We also have a campaign against land sales, because there's having these land sales in communities around the country, mostly Jewish communities, to sell stolen land in Palestine, completely illegal, because you have to be Jewish to buy the land, and because it's in illegal settlements. But the U.S. government lets it happen. So we've been disrupting those. If you stay in, and we also have a campaign against Zim, the Israeli shipping line. If you follow PAL-Awda, PAL-AWDA, Awda means return, the right return, on Instagram. You can stay in touch with our campaigns. And okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. He knew a lot, didn't he? He knows a lot, doesn't he?
No.
Okay. Our next speaker is Pam Africa. Mama Pam.
Thank you. Trying to stay confined to the seat. Confession. I haven't read the book. I read one part of it. But at a point I purposely didn't read it because I wanted to see what everybody else was saying. And but the book is something that I'm going to read. But Suzanne Ross was my interest. This Jewish child that was born in, say it,
Belgium.
Okay, now let me tell you this right now so you can understand. If you don't know what CRS is, I must remind you. Can't remember shit, okay? And when I'm at certain places, I will say, can't remember sometimes. But since I'm here, I'm much more real. So I'm going to need some help from people When I get a little stuck, like I turned to Suzanne, I know it was Belgium, but it didn't come up. I would turn, and I would turn to you as well. This is family participation about a serious issue. I come here to learn more about what I don't know too much about. I know that it's right to stand up and fight and all for Palestine, for the people of Palestine. Being a victim of, the government bombing, maiming, killing, jailing, and growing up in a neighborhood where there were Jewish merchants and things, we see things, differently. And but being around Suzanne and my other warrior sister there, Naomi Jaffrey, and a lot of other people, I've come to, learn and, want to learn more. But I never knew nobody, I thought, that was born, during the time of the Nazis' reigns and fleeing from one area to another, and then being taught. Suzanne taught me something one day. She said that they were taught that there was a land for people, and no, there was a land with no people. Right. And the Jewish people was taught that that land needs to be occupied. And so, this started a movement, going there. So I understood this, but I never understood all the different things that you went through. I knew that Suzanne was a frontline soldier, and I wanted to know, what was this woman made of? This woman who I seen her children right here. Okay, Isabel is the granddaughter. Clara Ann is the mother. And Clara Ann on the front line, high school, standing on the front line of the fight for Palestine, on the fight for Mumia, and taking it up in her classrooms, these issues that, wasn't popular issues, and to stand firmly, and then to see it come right down to Isabel, who was taught the same thing. When you seen demonstrations for Palestine, and I'm trying to get all this stuff together in my head, this Jewish woman on the front line fighting for Palestine, and I'm thinking that Jewish people were the people that were actually doing the murder, the maiming, the bombing, the killing, and all was, when Cynthia McKinney and a group of people went to do a fact-finding mission, and when they threw, I think they said they shot bombs or something at the boat or something that they went, but they wound up in jail. And being involved in this movement, I found out also that Black folks, when Cynthia McKinney went to jail, she talked about when they was arrested and taken to Israel in jail. And I'll still say Palestine, but the occupiers say Israel. And she said, I saw nothing but darkness. And and I thought she was talking about the light, but she was talking about the people of a darker hue that was that was Jewish, who had came there and are seeking of this place to live for Jewish people. I'm learning all the while from Suzanne, who was explaining to me, because she was the closest ear of a Jewish person that, I knew, and things that were actually happening. And then to find out she wanted to write a book about her experiences from, Belgium into Mozambique and, the different other places. What was the changes from this young child and becoming Zionist and on into this front line battle against Zionism and wanting to teach about it. And Suzanne, she is a strategic revolutionary. She is responsible for a lot of the great things that happen with a lot of other people that she pulled along, things, for Mumia, but she always included Palestine. She was always a teacher, and I see this book as another way of her bringing us all together so that we can learn more about what is going on in Palestine. Now, Bill, you were excellent. And I know Immortal Technique is going to be phenomenal, as well. And with, yeah. And but that's my reason for, being here and to understand more. And I'm working on bringing Suzanne to Philadelphia to a really nice bookstore there and encouraging other people, because she didn't do this to say, oh, this is me and this is what I was going through. She wanted to educate people, those who didn't know and those who do know, and those who felt the horrors of living in Belgium and having to move, living in all these different places and having to move from one place to another place, and also being the victim of having family members that are, would you say Zionists?
Everybody in my family, but me is a Zionist.
Okay.
Both sides of my family.
And Isabel taking them on and all as they was on this big yacht and all, and I love Suzanne because she teaches her children to stand up and don't be afraid to talk. Not be afraid to say what it is they have to say, and not be afraid to step on that front line. Yes, this is me, this is who I am. And Suzanne also taught police.
Yes, I did. I forgot.
She was a psychiatrist for police, right? And so her teachings go far beyond what we see. And I think it's really important that we learn who the people are around us and what makes them take different steps, and what actually make them be, who they are. And I'm just really proud to be here with Suzanne, sitting with her and learning as, from the book. I did read some of it, and, learning other people's experiences and, in the real. And so I just want to thank you, Bill, for assisting her, Immortal Technique for putting, this out everywhere. Okay, the two of you sitting over there that's always been in our corner.
Yes.
Say their names.
Lillian.
Yes. and what, you got CRS too?
Gary.
And Gary. See, it happens to us, right?
Yes.
And,
I'm older than her.
by how many years?
9.
9, okay. And in fact, I'm celebrating, I turned 78 in November, so I'm not celebrating the day, I'm not celebrating a week, a month, I'm celebrating the year. And part of that year is, sitting here with each and every last one of you, and to help enlighten who I am. And to help build me. We build each other.
Yeah.
That's what these events is about, building unity and understanding, and of what it is that we're fighting, and why we're fighting it, how it started, and the ins and outs of the damn government, involvement in this. We must learn these things. I'm saying for those of you who already know. And you still got to learn more. I'm learning more. And I just want to thank Suzanne for writing this spectacular memo. No, that's the memo or something else. Right. But this is sort of like one. This is part of it. Yeah, for bringing us together. And, so that we can continue to learn from each other and want to be closer in this fight, because we need each other. There's no doubt about it. And we, all these differences, learn. And because I was just as scared of Jewish people as I was the word communism, because we're taught to be that way. But I learned communism is a great thing. It is a great thing. And you know, when you're talking about building community and being together, and the fears, we got to go past them fears, find out what it is about each other. I find out the Zionists I have no use for, other than to try to teach and be an example, so that those who fell the wrong way can come back and you know, or be introduced into. I want to be one, and will continue to be one of those millions who stand up against Zionism, who stand to be an example of what to do and who to stand with. Thank you, Suzanne, for your book, for bringing us together. Long live Palestine, from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. So there's a reason why when I met Pam for the first time in the early 90s.
Sorry.
Thank you. That when I met Pam in the early 90s, I became very, very close to her and have worked with her to this day. And it's been my great honor to work with this amazing, amazing warrior, sister warrior of ours. So thank you, Pam. And now we have the great Immortal Technique. And we are so happy to have him here.
It's a lot easier for me to do it this way.
What'd he say?
I guess I'm more used to it. Whenever I read from my phone or a piece of paper, I feel like I'm cheating. So I'm used to just doing it off the head. But first and foremost, I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. We could have all been at home washing our rug or doing something else or opening a jar. You know. But we're here today together. And I think what I love about this book, being that I read it the first day I got it, is that it's a window back into World War II politics. As a kid in school, I went to a good school, I went to Hunter, and they taught me, oh my God, this World War II was a fight inside Europe for the soul of Europe, and America came in and saved Jewish people. And then I learned the real history of World War II, and America and its involvement in World War II had nothing to do with it, quote unquote, saving Jewish people. When you look at the book and when you read the first couple of chapters, as she talks about her life in Nazi-occupied Belgium, it clearly also talks about the other countries that are in Europe and what their involvement is with right-wing fascism. And just briefly, even though it doesn't specifically go into this topic, it underlines some very important things. So we have Salazar, who's a right-wing fascist, and allied to Hitler, but is not helping him. Right? And then you have Franco, right-wing fascist, allied to Hitler, but is also not helping him as well. Mussolini in Italy, who's openly helping him, but a right-wing fascist. Marshal Pétain is now ruling in France when he's allied to Hitler, but he's also not helping him. And I thought this was such an interesting throwback to that time, because it showcases the fact it really was the United States, UK, and Russia who gets out of the equation, cut out of the equation so many times, that really defined the post-colonial world we know after World War II. And one important thing was that fascism, and this is the most important part I got from the book, fascism doesn't come to people in its naked form. It never appears in plain sight. It always shows up and offers itself as a solution to your problems, right? It offers the illusion of efficiency. It offers the idea of law and order. And it also offers very easy solutions to people who have a rudimentary understanding of history. A real easy way to point a finger and say, it's all these people's fault. You know, if we all think about it, you know, if we all get together and think real hard, we can start pointing the finger all at the same time and we'll arrive to the same conclusion. Oh, by the way, if you don't, I'm going to fix your mind. And this is what we deal with fascism. And I think one other thing that we don't recognize enough, but is also foreshadowed and talked about in the book, is America's growing role in what global fascism would look like, including its support for the state of Israel. If we can be shocked and appalled and terrified and heartbroken and physically jarred by the images that we see out of Gaza, then I would welcome people to think for a second if we could simply imagine social media now, back in 2005, and we could see what the United States was perpetrating in Iraq. It would look exactly like the images that we see in Gaza, entire level neighborhoods destroyed, people ethnically cleansed, right? Thousands of people from just different neighborhoods wiped out overnight. And then those that were left suffered through an unspeakable hell that the United States specifically planned, right? We see the mention of these Zionists in their secret writings, right? So when you argue with a person that says, oh no, we came here for freedom, well, I can't trust you. I would rather trust the words of Ben-Gurion, who really openly states here in the letters to his son, well, there's hundreds of thousands of people. So first lie about it being empty has already been destroyed. Second one that we talk about is, oh, well, we're just going to have to ask them to move. No one had any intention of asking people to move there. We're going to forcibly remove these people. And the United States and its quest to have that sort of unquestioned hegemonic view of the region and have everyone follow that view, that perspective, is not lost on anyone who's seen history develop. And that's why we know that it's so telling that we see Joe Biden say things in the past such as, oh, if we didn't have an Israel, we'd have to create one to protect our interests in the region. And I remind people that nobody defines nobody defines a fascist or imperialist better than themselves. You know, our greatest indictments will always pale in comparison to their hubris, right? Remember Leona Helmsley, the richest woman in New York City. What did she say that caused her downfall? It wasn't any of our complaining. It wasn't people banging on her door saying, hey, you should pay your fair share. The schools in the neighborhood are going broke. No, it was her hubris when she got on the New York Times in the article and said, hey, you know what? Only little people pay taxes. Oh my God. That statement right there was more earth-shattering than all of us throwing rotten fruit and toilet paper at City Hall. Here comes the person that is already benefiting from every advantage that the state could possibly give them. And on top of that, they want to lift their leg and take a dog-like hydrant piss on every single thing that you hold dear and believe in. The idea of this structure that somehow gives the world you live in shape. And then when I read these little anecdotes in the book, they realize, oh no, we didn't give the world shape. We gave the world the shape in the aftermath of what we survived in it. And these people that designed the laws and redlined their districts, they made it. And we live in the aftermath of that. And so the question then becomes, what do we do about that? You know? And I think the book is a great first step into any introductory course on what we see going on now. You know, it speaks to length about a person's personal plight. You know, I've known Suzanne for years, Dr. Ross. I've known her for years. I've seen her at all the Free Mumia events, but I had no idea that, you know, her and her father and her family had to escape the Nazis and go to Mozambique, and then they lived on a kibbutz. I didn't know that her father was recruited by British intelligence to out a Portuguese Nazi in Africa. I mean, these things are great little stories, and I think the beautiful thing is that it makes them easy to read. And, you know, in a world where people are trying to be more complicated to impress you, here comes a little gem that makes things less complicated and talks about a person's complicated life in the most simplistic terms. This is what I survived. This is what the people who surrounded me believed in. This is what I came to believe because of my personal experiences in life. And in that sense, I mean, it's very quick and easy read. I tell people, you know, if you have time and you're on the Metro North or you're going to Brooklyn these days on the train, which takes 2 hours, you know, you can just tear through this little thing. And it's a perfect gift for the family because just having people that are, you know, are devout Zionists in your family, you could just place this right on the wall. And it's a perfect gift that when your relatives visit and they come over, right, and they have like that fake Israeli keffiyeh, you know, and they see this shit on the wall. What is this? If even the person who detests this sort of thinking is forced to look at it and says, born Jewish in Nazi Europe, my journey, not your journey, right? Not your beliefs, not your view of the world, my journey to becoming an anti-Zionist. I thought it was a great little book, and I already gave away 2 of the copies that she gave me to people that I know were interested, but seemingly, and we can't blame them, people are afraid to put their foot in the water. They're afraid to ask questions. And a long time ago, a brilliant young Black Panther told me that the only people who are afraid to ask questions are slaves. So that if you find yourself in a position where you're afraid to even ask a question, not make a demand, right? We haven't even gotten that far. But you're afraid to ask a question, and you find yourself in a similar position, although you're mentally enslaved, which is just as hard to get out of sometimes. Because once the physical oppression is gone, the mentality of that remains, and it's ingrained. And the point of saying that is that the process of conditioning people to live like that is something that human beings have studied for years. You know, the Nazis, and when we read about their brutality and the idea that the SS were given orders to have a puppy and then they shoot it on the last day, that's a Babylonian thing, right? The people who protected the emperor were given a woman, and they were forced to kill her before they became the bodyguard for a Babylonian despotate. So these things are borrowed from history. When we see Native Americans being corralled into reservations in our history here in this country and slowly killed off. Oh, we didn't kill those people. They just got sick. Oh, really? So I guess everyone that Stalin sent to Siberia just got cold, right? Is that the game that we're playing here today? Can we not have private conversations and public conversations about the sometimes and unfortunate hypocrisy that remains in all human beings? The difference between us and the system is that we're supposed to openly embrace ours while they do everything to pay people off to hide theirs. But at the end of the day, you know, when I read stuff like this, and it brings me back to a time before I existed, I realized that, like I said before, imperialists define themselves better than anyone else can. And Augustus Caesar said, there are no enemies and no allies, only common interests. And if you can see the United States' actions and its support of the Zionist state in Israel, you'll realize that it is an entirety of theirs to support something that they know is not moral, that would not be the basis of any moral argument anywhere, but it's for a strategic purpose, right? In the sense that our involvement in the region will continue as long as we want our view and our design and our vision complete. And that's why we decided to co-opt other Arab nations. We got tired of fighting them. Why fight these people? Why not cut them in? Okay, right? And we have this wonderful argument and dialogue that I see growing online. And what is created from it, I think, are the questions.
I'm so sorry. I have to interrupt you, but I have Mumia on the line.
Oh, please. Mumia, hold on. Listen. 1 second. Brother Mumia, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. How are you?
How you doing, brother?
Well, thank you. Thank you.
This is Immortal Technique, Mumia. You're in front of everybody right now.
What's up, Tech? How are you, brother?
I'm good. I'm here for the Born Jewish in Nazi Europe, My Journey to Become Anti-Zionist by Dr. Suzanne Ross. And we wanted to get your feedback on a project like that. And we also all here collectively want to offer you our love and support, because I know that you are the last man standing. You know what I mean? You are the inspiration for so many of us that got into this movement, brother. So we applaud you and we appreciate you.
I applaud you, and I thank you, and I thank you all for being there. However, I just received the book last night, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet. definitely intend to read it, and I told Suzanne that, you know, when I read it, I would get back to her and, you know, have some comments. But I know, knowing Suzanne, I know that even though it's a very short booklet, more than a book, I will definitely read it and let her know what I think. And knowing her, I know she put her feet in it and really expressed herself to the fullest degree, because that's what Suzanne does. So she does it on all kinds of issues. And but you know, I was glad to get it because it took forever to get here, and I will be reading it shortly. Other than that, I just urge people to read it and come to their own conclusions. You ain't gotta wait to hear what Moo said, because we all have our own minds and our own conceptions of history. So read it and let her know, and then I'll be at the back of that line talking about, I read it too, Suzanne. Here's what I think.
Well, we appreciate you very much, brother. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Immortal Technique, and also I congratulate Suzanne for putting her work together, because I think that in these times, right, in terms of what's happening in the world, and most especially what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank, it's important to hear a Jewish anti-Zionist voice. And Suzanne has been that for many, many years. So I congratulate her for putting her work out there for people to ponder and think about, especially at this time. So
this is a call from
congratulations,
Pennsylvania
Suzanne
State
Ross,
Correctional
Dr.
Institution,
Suzanne Ross.
Mahanoy. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
So I joined the list of people congratulating her for putting it into the world. Congratulations, Dr. Suzanne Ross.
Thank you, Mumia.
Thank you, brother Mumia. Thank you. I'm gonna pass you to
Immortal
Tom.
Technique.
We love you.
It is a pleasure.
On the
Love
move.
you, brother.
Where's Isabel? Isabel, do you want to speak to Mumia? You can say what you want.
The caller has hung up.
Well, I can't end it any better than that. I appreciate that. That was wonderful. Please give a huge round of applause for Mumia Abu-Jamal and for Dr. Suzanne Ross. Thank you very much. And if you haven't got it yet, like I said before, this is a great Christmas, Hanukkah thing. You could, anytime you have relatives that come over and sometimes you don't know how they might think or feel about something, you can just put it up like a small painting in your house. Maybe even buy a frame for it and leave it there, you know? Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your patience, and thank you.
Good night, Moo, if you're still there. No, he's gone. Okay, great. So that was a treat. That was a treat because somebody gave him time, because it's so hard to get time in prison on the phone. So Mumia often ends up not being able to reach us when he's intending to. So it's particularly wonderful to have him reach tonight. And Mumia would be talking about, I shouldn't talk for him, but I know that he would be talking about settler colonialism. And he'd be talking about Israel as a settler colonial state. And some of you don't know, I try to get him to announce it and to announce it to everybody. He's doing his doctorate. Mumia got a college degree and a master's degree while in prison. And he's now working on his dissertation through the University of California, and he's writing about Frantz Fanon. And he's absolutely in love with Frantz Fanon, and says that he explains everything so well to this day, what's happening with Palestine, what's happening with Israel, and what it means, and just that the notion, the whole issue of settler colonialism is still something that we need to talk about. It's not gone. It's not gone. And that's why I was saying earlier that in this next period, we should keep our perspective on the larger picture in the world. Palestine is not alone. The struggle in Palestine is not alone. But we need to give Palestine everything we possibly can, because of the courage, because of what it stands for the world, because it's been ignored for so long, because people have missed the boat, including myself, of course. That's a lot of why I wrote the book, because I began understanding what I had missed all these years, even though I have been in Vietnam, in El Salvador, in Cuba, in Venezuela, in so many places around the world, and have been privileged to be part of so many struggles, and met people like Pam Africa and Mumia Abu-Jamal. I've been so privileged, and yet I did not really fully understand it until recently. So brainwashed was I. And that was one of the reasons I had to write this, is to help other people, Zionists. And it's, brainwashing, like we say, like Mumia says, he was brainwashed on the gay issue. If you read the program and the whole thing that Bob Lederer put together, it's an amazing story when you see where Mumia was at 20 years ago and 30 years ago and where he is today. And he cops to it, just like I had to. And that's one of the things we all have to do, is to look honestly at where our consciousness went wrong and where we were misled. In that little book, I have a thing I wrote when I was 12 years old. And it was about a year after I had discovered Zionism. I was in the United States about 1 year, and Zionism had spread like wildfire after World War II in the United States. It was crazy, overnight. And I, as a child, speak the words of what I was taught. I mean, I repeat the narrative. I'm 12 years old. I was not an uneducated child, and I wasn't someone who didn't read or didn't think. I argued, I was a good student, but I was brainwashed. What can I say? I was a child. I was surrounded by this. I believed that Jews were in danger every moment, and that the way to fight for the survival of the Jews was to fight, to talk about what was wrong about the Palestinians and the Arabs in general. The Arabs were presented as monsters in racist language. So that's the other thing, the role of white supremacy in building the settled colonial state is, hand in glove. It's hand in glove. So there are a lot of more things to say, but I think we should move on to questions, because people have been very, very patient. So here we go. Open to questions. We have a question from somebody who's of Egyptian origin. Right over here. It's about Clara.
The opposite direction.
My team.
Hi, my name is Asam Eldagar. I am always wondering, it may sound like a simple question, but what is the real number of Jews around the world?
I don't know. I really don't know. Does anybody else know? Yes.
How many? 14?
14 million.
Yeah, so we know that 7 exist in Israel, 5 exist in the United States. So does that leave 2 million only for the rest of the world? In the Soviet Union, in Yemen, in Morocco, in Syria? There are so many Jews around the world. There cannot be only 2 million across the globe.
I agree. That's not likely.
So I think there is.
We do our research.
Yeah, I think there is a little some exaggeration or some something not right on this number. Also, we have known that Ben Gurion was fond of changing history a little bit. So, is it possible that that the number of people killed in the Holocaust was much smaller than the 6 million that were across everybody knows now the 6 million. Is it possible that that was not the real number? It was much smaller than that? Is that a possibility?
I mean, I'll just answer, but other people maybe have more facts on this. I know I've heard this raised many, many times. And I don't want to get into it because I think I don't want to minimize the significance of the Holocaust. And, I don't want to exaggerate the numbers if they're not true. But on the other hand, there's been such a tendency in the world to minimize the Holocaust at the same time as there's been a strong tendency to not exaggerate the Holocaust so much, but to exaggerate the victimization of Jews as compared to the victimization of Palestinians. So that's more my concern. But does anybody else know? Do you know anything about the number of Jews that are, about the questioning of the 6 million for the victims of the Holocaust, Jewish victims of the Holocaust?
Well, I'm sure there are other people here who might like to speak to that, but I think there's no question that many millions of Jewish people were exterminated by the Nazis simply because of who they were, of being Jewish, children, women, men, thrown into gas chambers, executed, thrown into pits. When we call the Zionists, when we compare the Zionists with the Nazis, that's because the Nazis were so horrible, And it happened. I mean, you yourself, every Jewish person I know has lost knows dozens of relatives who perished at the hands of Hitler, of the Nazis. So it's a very real thing, a very real tragedy, and the architects of it were the same imperialists who today stand behind Israel, the same capitalist class. But Nazism is real, the Holocaust was real, and the Nakba is real. What we really got to talk about today is there are Holocaust deniers and there are Nakba deniers today.
And one thing about Germany, I just think it's always important to point out that the United States immediately after World War II, we were taught to hate the Nazis and to hate what the Nazis did. The United States had no problems immediately making a deal with the United States and with Israel for reparations that went not to the Jewish people who suffered, not to people who necessarily spent time in concentration camps or poverty-stricken around the world, but where did it go? To the German government and return. And this is the real story of the fascists, how they unite. The real development was that the deal was that Germany was accepted into the family of civilized nations because they made this deal with the United States and Israel, and the money went, of course, to the Israeli government. Many, many people, many survivors of the Holocaust are starving. Many Holocaust survivors are suffering all over the world, and that money did not go to them. That money went to the state of Israel. So that's as much, unless anybody else has anything to say. I respect your question. It's legitimate.
Okay.
Okay? Anybody else have any questions? Yes. Come on up.
No.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha. The gentleman next to you said that everybody knows Jews that suffer the Holocaust, but I want to make a very clear point. Jews who lived in Arab countries did not suffer any Holocaust or anything close to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Where are we?
late myself. You spoke a little bit about Theodore Herzl and
You project perfectly.
and the founding of Zionism. And for me, what I came to understand that Theodore Herzl, during the Balfour Declaration, they were speaking with Rothschild, because Balfour sent a letter to Rothschild. So these are key players in the banking industry. And so what I came to understand, and I think I appreciated what you were talking about, as this being kind of looking from a global perspective. Once we pull ourselves out of like maybe just the idea of focusing just on Israel, that it seems clear that at the foundation of Israel, there were banking interests that had global interest. And that not only was Balfour talking to Rothschild, who had already invested in the area, but that the first Jewish Zionist Congress was in Basel, Switzerland, which is the home of the Bank of International Settlements. So I appreciate the fact that, just to bring into perspective that that we can have a conversation pulling it back, and it's very clear that, and people was talking about earlier about, it made me think of Gaza, location. Netanyahu talking about during Iraq. So I guess my question is, what, from your perspective, I haven't had the opportunity to read the book, what would be your perspective on the key playing of, it seems like, the economic structure? Because from my limited perspective, it seems it's not just about Israel. It's about putting in place a particular central bank system in that area and have a particular economy. Because if it was just Israelis and Jewish people exchanging value in a region, no one would care. But now that they're going to put a particular economic system in that area, it seems clear that it's connected to a global interest that maybe reside in banking. Because from my limited perspective, it seems that British imperialism, even going back to however long someone was talking about Babel, it seems that there's always money players behind it. It seems that the Bank of International Settlements and the central banks may have a key role in maybe pulling some of the shots behind the scenes.
So I don't know if you hear earlier when I said that, when I was talking about the dialogue that was going on by the imperialists, the colonialists, the people who were trying with Zionists, saying to them, the Zionists were saying, look, we need you to keep control of that region. We need you civilized people to control this motley population that resides in the Middle East. So that's one thing. The second thing is, when you read Herzl, I was shocked the first time. I know why they don't advertise him a lot. Because if people read Herzl and saw what a pig he was. Did you hear that? Let's just say it loud, say it proud. So you heard that, a racist motherfucker, and I completely agree. And he says somewhere, when I read his autobiography, I went, what? This is the guy that millions of people followed? I think they followed him because they didn't read him. But the thing he talked about, he quotes at some point, he says, if I had a choice of what to be, I would want to be a Prussian prince. That's what he said. And I looked at that. What? That's what he said. That he wanted to be a prince. And these people who were involved with the Zionists, and he was talking to the Balfours and the Rothschilds, and that's who they were. Yes, they were bankers, and they were business people, and they were rich people, and they did not reach out to the Jewish working class, of which there was a very large, all over the world, a Jewish working class that was active in progressive politics. Jews played another role, a mixed role. So it's a double story, and you have to look at both sides. And now I think we're seeing the positive, the progressive side of Judaism coming back, definitely in this country and in France and in much of Europe. The kinds of demonstrations that Jews are showing shows that there's more of that. But, we know that the Jews played a role in the Russian Revolution, played a role in so much of the, in the United States, in this country, in the anti-war movement, in, much of the left history. Jews played a very important role. So Jews did that. while at the same time also being very white at various points in history and identifying with the white forces of this country, the racist forces, and the sellouts, what we call the sellouts of rich Jews and even not so rich Jews who made deals with the empire. And I'm sure my friend here has something to
No,
say.
let's open up more,
Okay.
more questions.
Dolores, come on up. Oh, you have a. You have a.
You got a question for you? Yay.
Where's Isabel?
Right here.
Sorry, he's going first.
Hey, I want to talk about the use of shaming as a tool. And you spoke about the elderly family member who went to his deathbed almost, being ashamed to admit that he was a practicing religious Jew from the shtetl in Eastern Europe. I remember reading about on the kibbutz, like you mentioned that you lived in a kibbutz for a while. There were certain kibbutzes that were in a community together, and they didn't allow rabbis to come onto their property. And if you wanted to be married, you had to go into town because they didn't want any rabbis coming into the kibbutz. So that's an example of people who were religious. In the case of your uncle, or was it, who was shamed into conforming. And it made me think of the Jews from the Arab and Muslim lands who, well, let me put it this way. The original Zionist project was primarily intended to find a place for Europeans, especially after World War II. And it was not particularly encouraging Jewish people who were Muslim, came from Muslim lands or Arabic lands. And there were actually meetings in the Knesset where they discussed, what are we going to do? Because it turned out that there were actually years when more Jews left Israel after World War II than arrived after World War II, because they didn't want to be there, creep them out. And so the meetings in the Knesset were, what are we going to do? Who's going to farm the land? Who's going to make the desert bloom in their terminology? The Europeans, the professionals, the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, they came here and they said, what's this? I'm not digging a row of hoe with a hoe. And they left. So in the Knesset, they said, what are we going to do? Are we going to let the Palestinians come in and do the dirty work? Okay, well, we don't want that. So now we will allow the Jews from the Muslim and Arabic lands to come in. But they have to agree to be second-class citizens, and they were treated like shit when they got there. The Europeans got to live in housing developments. The Jews from the Arab and Muslim lands, they got to live in animal stalls and in tents. That's where they were provided for. So now we have people who talk about people like Suzanne and most of the people in this room who, if they reveal how they think, many Jews will say, you're a self-hating Jew. You hate yourself because you say things that are bad about Israel. So all of this falls under shame. What causes that, and what's the cure for that?
Well, I'm a psychologist by profession, so I should have some answer. I think it's a divide and conquer tactic. I think it's a tactic that the enemy uses to weaken the resistance of Jewish people. So I remember being at a demonstration in New York, maybe about 10 years ago, when I can't remember things I say about 10 years ago. And I was coming from the demonstration, walking alone. It was Midtown, somewhere around Times Square, I think. And some young woman comes yelling at me, you self-hating Jew, you self-hating Jew. I said, excuse me, do you speak Hebrew and Yiddish? And she looked absolutely astounded. The idea that somebody who was so much against, who was supporting the Palestinians, spoke Yiddish and Hebrew. And you know, that kind of shut her up a little, because the idea that the people who are supporting Israel as the true Jews, fuck you. You're not the one to decide. You're not the one to decide. And that's my answer to shaming, because I saw that way back. And my family most of them became settlers in Israel around Jerusalem, actually, those who are, you know, still survived. There was, I'm trying to remember what I wanted to say, I'm sorry. It was one of those moments, Pam. But it was about, oh yes, my family would question my Judaism, but everybody knew that I had gone to yeshiva, that I spoke Hebrew, that I spoke Yiddish, that I was not a self-hating Jew, that I fought anti-Semitism when I saw it crop up anywhere, including the progressive movement. No, nothing in my behavior suggested, really, that I was a self-hating Jew. And like I say, my family, who thought I was traitorous and done horrible things, they did not think I was a self-hating Jew. So I think you have to stand up to that, to the attack and being called a self-hating Jew. It's a tactic. It's a tactic they use to weaken us, to not let us speak up against Israel. Remember that. When they say that, charge them on that. Charge them for doing that. Anybody else want to answer that? Last question. Oh, she's the boss.
Hi. I remember Mandela speaking about his support for the Palestinian people, which is very important. And I noticed that there's always rabbis with us when we're marching and rallying. Do we know what sect they're from or what borough they're from?
Yeah, actually, Bill knows a lot about them, but it's called, there's a picture of me and Isabel and Bob Nash standing with the Natura Carta at a demonstration in support of Palestine. It's called the Natura Carta, and it's a Hasidic group that comes out of a particular, there are a lot of sects in Judaism, like every other group. So that's who they are, but they've been, Bill tells me they've been very heroic and very strong in their support. And they're obviously hated by the mainstream Jewish community. I just want to say that, I'm sorry, that Bill just reminded me that when I read Herzl, it was obvious to me that he was a self-hating Jew. Herzl. And that his contempt for Jews was repulsive to me. And he was always idealizing blonde people and people who, you know, a whole image of what Jews, he was ashamed of Jews. He was ashamed. And if people are ashamed of Jews, that's a self-hating Jew.
You know, my family lived in East New York, in Brooklyn, in the late 1950s. And they were, it was predominantly Jewish community in East New York, you know, before the white flight, you know. And so they were back then recruiting the young Jewish boys for the kibbutzes back in Israel in the late 50s in Brooklyn, in the East New York section. It's interesting.
So I think for now, our time has come. People are telling me our time has come.
Suzanne's story for me? Yes, get in here.
Just apropos of being a self-hating and a non-self-hating Jew, one of my favorite little Suzanne stories is, you know this story. Suzanne has a nephew who is a very Orthodox Jew and a very fervent Zionist. And she confronts him like she confronts people and says, "Why do you think that this land belongs to us?" And nephew says, "Because God told me so." Suzanne says, "God told me something different."
Okay, so Jamil Al-Amin, for people who don't know, is very ill and needs support. He's a great, I always think I can talk without a mic, but I can't. So Jamil Al-Amin is a great hero of the movement. I remember him from my 20s, and he's very ill. He's been denied every opportunity. It's the same story all over again. And if you have a chance to write, to contribute money, to support him anyway, to read his stories about him, and to remember our hero, Jamil Al-Amin. So, you want to say something?
Support Palestine.
Oh, right. Jamil Al-Amin was a big supporter of Palestine. That's the other thing Pam was reminding me. So, and just let me say again, the Black movement has played an absolute, including the Black Lives Matter movement, including up to, I'm not just talking about 20, 30 years ago, has played, the radical sectors have played a major, major role, a leading role. And read Malcolm, read that first back of the cover of what Malcolm said about Israel. Okay, so please continue reading, continue studying, continue demonstrating in the streets. There's so many projects going on. I know I can't keep up with them, but I do whatever I can, and everybody should do what they can. I'm not here to guilt trip anybody. I'm here to say we all need to do whatever we can. So, shall we say it again? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.